university-wide institute dedicated to leading integrated initiatives in research and technology, focused very much at the nexus of computing and data sciences. So if something is computing driven, if it's data driven, it's computing enabled, these are areas that the Institute is particularly focused, and it acts as kind of a lens. So the use of word focus is not accidental here. It's a lens for people outside to look in upon the impact and potential that's inherent in our data-driven and computationally oriented investments at BU. And it also is a way of sort of focusing those within BU to achieve greater synergies amongst the constituents. So we have a whole bunch of different mechanisms and resources that we can bring to bear. We have a combination of thematic research centers and initiatives. We have year-long focused research programs. We have a software and data science development capabilities, lab space, state-of-the-art conferencing facilities, which are about to double in the coming month, and a spectrum of staff capabilities. Of course, at this current time, we also have, most importantly, Zoom, since much of what we do now is very much supported by Zoom. Powering the Institute is a whole set of what it takes to make research machines run. So we have a great group of staff and other support folks who help us support and nurture fledgling initiatives all the way through mature initiatives. The goal is to amplify faculty research to larger communities. They help support grant submission, management, event planning, promotion, and all the various financials and legals as well. So if I drill down just a little bit, the Hurry Institute was established in 2011. Key points along the timeline that you see running there are when various of our centers and initiatives and labs came on board. So there are two centers that predated the Hurry Institute. This is the Center for Computational Science and the Reliable Information Systems and Information Security Center, or RISCs. Those were brought into the overall Hurry Institute, and then they were joined soon thereafter by an initiative on cloud computing. The cloud computing initiative has actually evolved over time until what you see at the far right side there now is the so-called Red Hat Collaboratory. That's a $5 million, 5-year partnership with Red Hat, with the leading providers in open source software. In 2014, we had a data science initiative and a digital learning and innovation initiative. Both of those were so successful that they migrated out of the Institute in turn and are their own entities within the campus. 2015 saw the development of the Software Application Innovation Lab. That is our in-house software development and collaboration group. The Cybersecurity Law and Society Alliance, or the Cyber Alliance, is a very important and innovative interface between security and privacy on the one hand, and groups like Policy and Law on the other hand, which is getting increasingly important every day as people struggle at the interface of understanding the implications of computing as they affect human good, human health, ethics, etc. And then in 2017, we had three additional initiatives come join us. One is the Boston Women's Workforce Coalition. This is joint with the Mayor's Office in the City of Boston, focused on reducing the gender wage gap. We have an initiative with the Business School and the Medical Campus around digital health. And we have an artificial intelligence research initiative. So areas of core strength at the Institute, if you sort of look beyond each of those individual units I just spoke about, at the core, we have tremendous strengths, like a set of gears that I show there, that not only are unique enough to themselves, but they also work together in a very powerful fashion. These are in cloud computing, cybersecurity, and privacy, and finally, artificial intelligence. Right. And so the emphasis that we have at the Institute is both on development of these core areas in and of themselves, and also as they facilitate and support research conversions in domain areas and around various applications. Right. So today's focus is specifically aimed at COVID. These are meant to highlight contributions by Hariri-affiliated faculty to fight COVID-19. We're going to look at three topics. One is why COVID hit some patients harder than others. The second one is privacy-preserving exposure notification, and then finally, how the media handle COVID-19. I should say that we have a tremendous amount of work at BU that's been done supporting the COVID effort. We're showing you just a little bit today. We even have efforts on campus that have been devoted towards supporting the BU Fall 2020 reopening. So that's something I myself had a small role in, spearheading a group that supported the modeling behind what would be possible on campus. So as BU over the summer went through an exercise of thinking about various of the things that I'm sure you've seen through your alumni views of BU today in the Brink, you saw that we were thinking about testing. We were talking about contact tracing, right? And how would this all work together? Eventually, a plan came together. This was supported, as you see in the Brink article there, by an enormous amount of data and modeling effort. And modeling, of course, can't take us all the way, but it can give us a sense as to what can happen. And I think it's fair to say the university as a whole has been delighted to see that what can happen has so far for the first month, knock on wood, has actually come to pass, and that through the combination of the different efforts that BU put in place, it looks like we've done a reasonable job so far of keeping the COVID infections under control. So to give you just a little glimpse of what that modeling effort looked like, these were network-based models at the level of the BU individual populations. So we had data on all classrooms, we had data on all residences, and we had various ways to model the flow of infection onto campus. All of that was put into a large network representing the possibility of contacts and the possibility for infections. We then used an epidemic-based model, what they call so-called SEIR model, to model the progression of the disease as it's currently understood. As you can imagine, this was something that throughout the course of the summer was constantly being revisited and revised as globally we got a better understanding of COVID. And it describes particularly the dynamics behind going from exposed to these very unique pre-symptomatic and asymptomatic characteristics that are manifested by COVID. In the end, this was possibly the most important diagram that we produced after hours and hours and hours of computation. This showed the successive impact of cumulative interventions going from the red line at the top, predicting possible cumulative infections in the face of doing nothing, through what would happen when you put in interventions into the households where the students were living, into the classrooms where they were learning and the faculty were teaching, bringing on 5,500 tests a day, accompanied by a system of self-attestation, incorporating contact tracing. What you get at the very end is that little teeny blue line just above the pink line, where the pink line is meant to represent what's essentially going on in Boston, and the blue line is meant to represent that it is possible to bring BU's rates down to essentially the Boston levels. So I'm going to end there. And I'm going to stop sharing screen. I'm going to turn over to Josh Campbell. He's going to talk to you about why COVID hits some patients harder than others.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. Let me pull my slides up here. All right, great. Well, I'm excited to present to everybody today about this very important question about why does COVID-19 hit some patients harder than others. Once again, my name is Josh Campbell. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Medicine down on the medical campus. But I'm also actually a BU alum myself. I got my PhD in the bioinformatics program at BU, so I'm excited to be presenting to other BU alumni today. And this question is, of course, very important because of the numbers of deaths that keep going up over the months due to COVID-19. But I'll be totally honest with you about the answer to this question right up front, is that we actually don't fully know yet. But what I do plan on telling you is a little bit about the research that's being done in my group, as well as others on the medical campus, to really try to learn more about this disease and understand the differences between individual responses. But just to quickly remind you about some of the other metrics that are important, which I'm sure a lot of you have been hearing in the news about some of the risk factors for more severe COVID-19 disease, where as epidemiological data comes in, we're learning more and more about what's associated with worse disease. The biggest factor continues to be age, where the older somebody is, the more likely it is that they're going to have a worse reaction to COVID-19. This can be seen in hospitalization rates, where, for example, 75 to 84-year-olds are 8 times higher to be hospitalized compared to 18 to 29-year-olds. It can be the risk can be greatly seen also among deaths, where older age groups are many hundreds of times more likely to die compared to younger groups. But we're also learning more about other diseases and how they may play a role in these having a severe response to disease. So, for example, if you have asthma, you're more than 1.5 times likely to be hospitalized. If you have diabetes or chronic kidney disease, you're 3 or 4 more times likely to be hospitalized. And even if you have 2 or 3 of these conditions, the risk continues to increase. And again, we don't really know why these things are happening, but we do see them on an epidemiological level. One of the potential key mechanisms about the biology that may be relating these other diseases in COVID-19 may have to do with the immune system. That is something that we're learning is very important in this disease. And so I'm showing you a picture on the left over here is an X-ray of somebody who has COVID-19, and they get this condition called, which you may have heard of, called ARDS, or acute respiratory distress syndrome. This is where your lungs begin to fill up with fluid and inflammation, and it's very risky because the lungs begin to lose their ability to oxygenate the blood, and so it's a very severe condition, and this is where somebody would be likely to be in the ICU. And we're learning more and more about what's happening in this ARDS. And one of the major factors is that we see a lot of accumulation of the immune system. And so there are many different types of immune cells, which can oftentimes be very important in fighting off infections or other diseases. One particular type of immune cell is called a macrophage, which can oftentimes be involved in attacking other bacteria, or it can be used, it can send signals to other immune cells to do various things. One of the problems that happens in COVID-19 is that you get things like macrophages, which produce these signaling molecules called cytokines, which then tell other immune cells to activate and produce more cytokines, which then activates more and more immune cells. And you get this thing called a cytokine storm, and that can lead to one of these conditions called ARDS and ultimately death. The problem is we don't really know why some patients have this their immune system responds this way while others seem to be just fine. It remains to be one of the most important central questions. Beyond just the damage to lungs, we're learning more and more about what can happen to other these other clinical symptoms that can happen in other organs. So you can have liver damage or acute kidney damage, or coagulation and blood clotting problems, and all these factors can contribute to things like death, but they're all not present in everybody. Some people have some of these things happen and other ones don't. And so there remains this fundamental challenge of how do we study different individuals and then find out what's going on, especially with the immune system. And I wanted to point out one really interesting piece of work that was done by my colleagues at Boston Medical Center in the Department of Pathology, where they actually set up this program for rapid autopsies. And one of the why this is so important is because one of the most challenging things is to get lung tissue from diseased patients. And most people, even if you're healthy, aren't really willing to just come in and donate a chunk of lung tissue. It's kind of important, so you don't really want to give it away. But they set up this program, and it was amazing on their end, first of all, because they had to don all the personal protective equipment, and they put themselves at increased risk for handling this infected tissue. But it's also incredible from the patients and their families to really be able to do such a sacrifice at such a hard time and then willing to donate tissue. But it happened, and for about 10 people, they were able to receive a lung tissue from somebody who had passed away from severe COVID. And they were able to find really interesting patterns, like they were able to look at the lung tissue on these glass slides, and maybe you or I might look at it and it looks sort of like one of those, maybe those magic eye things where you stare at it cross-eyed and, you see a weird 3D image pop out. But the trained pathologist like Eric Burks here was able to look at it and find really interesting things happening with the immune system. One of those was that some of the macrophages were actually eating some of the other immune cells and destroying them. And that's seen in a similar condition called, I'm just going to read the abbreviation, it's HLH, the full name you can see here on the slide. But what was interesting about that condition is that there's a known drug treatment for that called etoposide. And so from this information, they were actually able to start their own clinical trial and start treating patients with etoposide as a potential novel therapeutic. And so we're eager to see the results of it. But overall, I think they're able to do this within the course of a month or two. So just the rapid response is really incredible. The other thing that this study may suggest is that there might actually be some genetic predisposition to COVID-19 severity. So HLH, some people have inherited variants in their DNA that put them at, that cause the disease. And so this idea that some of the severe COVID-19 patients may actually have some changes in their DNA or some variation that puts them at risk for disease data sort of suggest this. And there's a recent study actually came out just last week in Science where they did DNA sequencing on a lot of severe COVID-19 patients, and they found that about 3.5% of them had mutations in key immune genes. And so this may be kind of a small piece of the puzzle where for at least some people, they may have these sort of defects in their DNA, which puts them at greater risk for having more severe disease. But it doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain why it happens later on in life that you have these more severe symptoms. And it only explains maybe a small percentage of patients. We don't know what's going on with the other 96.5% of patients. So that's where additional studies are being done by myself and others on the medical campus. I'll just point out one thing that was in B Today a while ago, an article where several of us were awarded just about $2 million from a Massachusetts consortium to begin to study COVID-19 pathogenesis in a variety of different ways. 4 of these investigators were highlighted in blue are actually members of the NEEDL, the National Emerging Infectious Disease Laboratories, where they can handle highly infectious tissue and actually take the virus and infect cells or other model organisms and begin to study the pathogenesis or test new therapeutics. And so we're all getting started with these projects and really excited to see the results. I'll just give you a quick glimpse into my project and what's going on there. Unfortunately, I don't have data from it yet because it's still under regulatory review, but I'll give you the sort of breakdown of what we're going to do and why it's going to be really exciting. We're going to use this thing called single-cell RNA sequencing to really understand at a really fine-grained molecular level what's going on within each individual cell within the disease, within the lung tissue of patients with the disease. The general concept here is that all the cells in your body are the same. They have the same underlying DNA sequence, but of course they're different. They have different functions. A nerve cell functions different than an immune cell, which is different than a lung cell. And the reason why that is because each cell can turn on different sets of genes. So a nerve cell, in this case, might turn on gene A, while an immune cell might turn on gene B. The problem is that in disease, cells can turn on genes, turn on or off genes that shouldn't be turned on or off. So it can be aberrantly turned on. And that may cause these sort of abnormal phenotypes. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to take the cells from those autopsy specimens that I showed you, and we're going to take thousands of cells from each individual lung and sequence them to try and figure out what genes are turned on or off in them, and really understand why the immune system is in overdrive in those patients. And we're working with the Hariri we've developed Bayesian models as well as a lot of software to be able to process and analyze this data very quickly when it comes out. And we're hoping that will happen in the next couple of months. So just to summarize, we know that an overactive immune system contributes to severe disease in a subset of COVID-19 patients. Some people may have genetic predisposition, but the results are preliminary, and we'll have to see how they pan out. And in fact, many different biological causes may contribute to the disease severity. So it may take actually studying a large number of patients to really find out all these different factors. And that's what a lot of us researchers at BU School of Medicine and collaborating with others in Hariri are trying to do right now. So again, thanks again for listening, and happy to take any questions in the chat later on, or in the discussion later on.
All right, I believe next up is Ryan Canetti and his colleagues. And if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A section. We will be monitoring that, and we're happy to try and funnel some of the panel discussion afterwards towards your questions.
Thank you. Second, let me share that. Okay. Everybody hear me? Hi, I'm Canetti. I'm a computer scientist, a cryptographer. That was a fascinating talk. And, you know, we're doing something very different on a very much lower, kind of like lower tech level to try to fight the disease. But it seems to be important nonetheless. So it's a project that is joint with Trachtenberg from engineering, which is here on the panel, and the Mayank Varia from computer science as well as Joel Dennis and Anand Varia from medical school, and actually many others. I met a bunch of students and other faculty involved, but this is just like main actors. So we all know that if we had an effective way to trace and isolate those superspreaders, we can quell this pandemic, right? So if we had a way to actually stop the spread or reduce this R0, that would be the end of it. And so why don't we just do it? We have lots of great technology to do it, but it seems to be really problematic from a social point of view. There are lots of issues, right? So collecting this data, trying to find out who was next to whom, and trying to figure out who was next to this person who was infectious or potentially infectious is extremely privacy invasive on the most sensitive things that people are sensitive about, the locations, who they were with, and in order to do this contact tracing, to talk about it a bit more, but it's really you have to ask people to share invasive information about themselves, and not about themselves, about other people, which you don't really know how they're going to affect, and there is it's really sensitive information and could be harmful in unprecedented and unexpected ways. And furthermore, quarantining people and keeping us isolated has serious effects, both on the people themselves and on society. And often the people you quarantine, it's not directly for their own good, but for the good of others. So there's a big societal issue of how to do it right, and what is ethical, what is moral, what is practical, what will work. And of course, there are other issues at stake, such as general freedom and choice and political freedom, etc. And indeed, all these issues get multiplied by a lot when the government is not completely trusted by its people for good or wrong reasons. It's just a fact, and this happens when the government is not trusted to do the right things for the society and for individuals at this moment, and also when the government is not trusted to not abuse this information now or later. So it's really kind of a conundrum. And indeed, as we see, even though technology is there, the pandemic rages on. Theoretically, it could have been over by now. And so let's just to begin talk about this contact tracing. So what is this process of contact tracing? You want to kind of trace You find the person that you know was infected. You go interview them. You ask them, you know, who did you meet, and then try to follow the people that they met and the people that they met, etc. Try to find all those people that could potentially be infected and either forcibly or willingly just you know, quarantine them. But we know that this is a problem, right? So, you know, we know that a small fraction of the people are actually providing information, and that is kind of unnatural. And that this is the case, and it sounds like in different countries the percentages are different, and it has to do with the social structure and social sensitivities. But in the U.S., it is indeed very problematic. So of course, you know, when you hear about this and you're a cryptographer, you know, immediately you have like a lot of light bulbs light in your head. You know, wow, we can help, right? So you know, there's this great quote from this fellow cryptographer Ben Adida, you know, saying cryptography is the way how the people get things done when they need each other and for information, for other stuff, but they don't actually trust each other to do the right thing. And furthermore, there are some adversaries that are trying to mess things up. So how do you actually do it? So cryptography actually gives you a set of tools to do it. And in fact, we here in the U at Hariri did it once, you know, with to help the Boston Women's Workers Council that Eric mentioned earlier. And you know, if you don't know details about that, it's a great story to tell, but not for today. But you know, maybe we can do it again. It's a very different context, but you know, let's do it again. So, so indeed, we had this idea. So this is something that started with, you know, with Ari and Mayank and myself. So why don't we use those cell phones? In fact, many people were thinking about how to use cell phones at the time. But we thought, you know, we can actually do it in a very privacy-preserving, simple and decentralized way. So here's like the basic idea, you know, of the automated exposure notification it is called today. So Alice's phone has this app that keeps sending those random chirps around, but it's importantly they're only sent via Bluetooth or whatever, that only nearby people can hear that, or even nearby phones. And then Bob walks by, and Bob's phone kind of records Alice's chirp, and then later on, Alice has learned that she was infected and she may have been contagious. So together with the doctor, they upload Alice's chirps from her phone from the time that she was potentially infectious to some public database. And then Bob just downloads those chirps from database, and oops, he sees on the phone, there's a chip that I've seen. Then, you know, I might have been infected. I should probably go do something about it, quarantine, maybe call health authority or something. But the point is that this is done in a completely decentralized way. Only Bob themselves, Bob's phone, will know. Nobody else will know unless Bob decide that they can tell it, they want to share it, and they will know nothing about who infected them, you know, unless you do such things malicious. But that's the basic idea. So so you know, we wrote this nice paper, and you know, we wrote some edit stuff, and actually even started working with the people at MIT to implement that. We had similar ideas, like different. And we thought, you know, that was it. You know, of course it's gonna catch, but little did you know what, you know, how hard it is to actually get those things on the road. So here we are. Since then, that was March and early April, you know, we're still fighting to get those things implemented. So a lot has been done, and actually many places similar, you know, this idea in different forms has been deployed. In fact, even some places in the U.S., still not in Massachusetts, unfortunately, but we're working on that. But it's really hard to get those things done. So as we know, I'm sure everybody here knows that, you know, Apple and Google eventually, actually pretty soon, picked up this idea that was floated by us and other people, and they decided, let's, you know, somehow give back to the world for all the years that we collected everybody's data. Let's give this this app that everybody will be able to use, and let's put this in in a privacy-preserving way. We'll just do the basics and let other people do the app just to finish it up because we don't want to actually deal with data. And that was sounded like a good idea to begin with, but it took a long time for people to understand, to realize, to not mistrust, to all these. Of course, people hear about Google, Apple, and immediately they have all their light bulbs go in danger. And although here they really are, I believe, truly have been and still are trying to do things for the best of the world, as opposed to their own profit. But it is still there's trust issues, and it's not even clear they are completely doing the right thing, even though they're trying. So it's now kind of in some sense out of the hands of innovators or university people. It's in the hands of big companies, but there's still a lot of work to be done in helping and convincing authorities. We've been working a lot with Massachusetts Health Authority, and we still are, and we're trying to get these things adopted and accepted. There are a number of companies that are doing apps based on this idea. Now Google and Apple are coming up with another idea. They're actually going to do an app themselves, or some basic app, to help local governments accept this, because apparently local governments are really deprived of technical knowledge in order to even have somebody that can say, look, this is okay, just use it. It's really exposes, in some sense, the weakness and deficiency of our society in getting those technologies accepted. So this is where we are, but we are still hopeful, and that this thing is going to happen in Massachusetts and everywhere, and it will help people. One thing is to get this disease down and get over it. But I think an even more important longer-term lesson is that we can actually use technology and cryptography in order to get things done together, even though we don't really trust each other, in order we trust the government, but we can still do it. So it still remains to be seen if we can actually do it, but I'm hopeful. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ron. And then for our last presentation, we have Leguo and Margrit Betke. I'm not sure if one or both of you are presenting.
I will present.
Okay. Ron, you need to let go of the screen, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point.
All right. Thank you very much for inviting us to speak at this panel. So I will present the project on behalf of my colleague Margrit and our research team. So I was a journalist and now a media scholar. So based on my research and research of my colleagues, we know that the media have the power to decide what we think, how to think, and even what to do in real life. So as for this panel's theme, so we believe the news media should also play an important role in communicating the COVID-19 to the public. So what I would like to share with you today is an ongoing project that my research team has been doing since early this year. How news media in different parts of the world cover COVID-19 and how it is potentially related to the real world statistics. So I would like to give a shout out to my research team behind this project, AIEM, Artificial Intelligence and Emergent Media. We are a group of communication scholars and computer scientists, and we have been using computational methods to answer communication-related questions. As you can see from this right image, like many other research groups, we have been meeting online during the past few months. So to start off, I would like to briefly explain a concept key to our project, media framing. So we know that it is journalists' responsibility to report reality, but in practice, they select parts of the reality and promote them among the audience. In communication research, we call it media framing. So if you look at this image, if the news media focus on the left part, the audience will see the cruelty of the soldier. And the image would be, and the message would be very different if the media focused on the right side of the image. And of course, we don't know what's happening outside of this image, right? So the full image here is also an outcome of journalist framing. Speaking of COVID-19, we know it is a health issue, but it can also be considered as a political issue, an economic issue, or a societal issue in news media's framing. Just to give you an example, so you probably have seen stories like these, which place the blame on certain countries or certain groups of people. This is media framing. And as a result, we have seen incidents of xenophobia and racism related to COVID-19 all over the country, and that is the effect of media framing. And of course, media framing not just happens in the United States, it happens everywhere. So our goal of this project is to look at what aspects of the pandemic have been emphasized on different countries' media agenda over time. And given that there's a huge amount of news media data about COVID-19, we use a combination of both traditional communication research methods and the computational methods, such as machine learning, to analyze the data. So currently, we have included 9 countries or regions into our map, and we will include more. For each country or region, we analyze the main topics about COVID-19, such as health, politics, education, the news media have emphasized each week, and try to correlate the media topics with COVID-19 statistics. So we actually also created a website to visually present our results. So we talk about our project, the research method on the website, and we also present the results of each country or region. So just give you an idea for each country or region, such as China. So we present the shift of news coverage over time. And we also put the topics and the real world COVID-19 cases together on the same graph, so we can try to explore the correlation between the media topics and the COVID-19 numbers. So since the pandemic is not over, our analysis is also ongoing, and we have tried our best to update the website on a regular basis. Our hope is that the public can also have a media channel to see how their own country and other countries react to the issue. So in the interest of time, I'll just briefly talk about what we have found about the news coverage in 2 countries, China and US here. So the figure presents the results of Chinese coverage. Different colors represent different topics, and the black line here represents the new COVID-19 cases by week. So as you can see from this figure, in mainland China, the pandemic has been in control since March, and it seems that government responses, the blue topic, and the domestic economy, the orangish topic, are the 2 topics that the Chinese media have focused on, and the pattern actually continues today. And let's look at the US graph together. It is clear that before the mid-March, all the news coverage was about China and the global economy. And as things became out of control after March, then the news media started to talk about the domestic outbreak, economy, and some other topics. And there are a few patterns that I found interesting, and I'll briefly talk about too. So if you can compare the US graph and Chinese graph, so one thing that the US paid a lot of attention to is personal preventive action, the green bar. So if you remember, this topic actually was not prominent topic in the Chinese news coverage. So in China, people just do it, and they wear masks and they keep social distance. But maybe because here the culture values like a decentralized culture coupled with a decentralized government, that makes preventive actions, the personal preventive actions, again, wearing masks, keep social distancing, hard to implement. And second, if you look at the Chinese news coverage, during the worst time, the media only focused on very few number of topics, like the healthcare, government responses, domestic economy. But if you compare it with US news coverage, the coverage here is way more diverse. So if you look at the black line, so it seems like the number of cases decreased a little bit since at the end of May and early June. And at that time, the media started to talk a lot about more topics. So for example, how the pandemic affects the local politics, the election, how the pandemic affects the entertainment and the sports industry, and also issues related to racism and race relations. And then we see the number rose again. So our next step is to run more stats to examine the correlation between media coverage and the COVID-19 numbers in a more systematic way. But here from this graph, we can already see some patterns of interaction. So overall, we see media in different countries and regions communicate the pandemic to their respective publics very differently, which may speak to the different situation each country is facing now. So I'll stop here in the interest of time. If you would like to see more about our project, I would like to invite you to explore our website, COVID-19FieldEmerge.com. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lei. And thank you to all the panelists. These are great presentations. We're going to move now to the discussion, our panel portion of our session today. Let me kick us off with a question just to kind of get our feet wet here. A little bit playful, but also serious. Data is driving everything that we were doing today. Data is both an enabler and a barrier, depending on what the quality and quantity of that data are. So if you had an additional source of data or additional type of data or additional improvement in your data, what would it be? I know from my point of view, right, when we're talking about the network modeling, we actually, the university has tremendous effort now around surveilling how it is doing, monitoring how it's doing. We have phenomenal efforts around contact tracing, but as Ran was saying, contact tracing is really hard. And if I had ideal perfect contact tracing, right, there a significantly better degree of calibration that one can do in the type of modeling we're doing than if we did not. So if I had a wish, a data wish, that would be my data wish. What are the rest of your thoughts?
But privacy preserving, of course. Right?
Privacy preserving, of course, yes.
I think the obvious one, obviously, if we could know who's sick and when they're sick, that would help a lot. But I assume you don't mean anything that broad.
No, I often think about sort of, even in my general projects, beyond COVID, I often try and think if I could have something as my next step, what would my next step be, right? Because sometimes your next step is actually more achievable than where you take it to somebody, you say, boy, if I only had this, and they say, that's actually not so hard. Or like you guys saying, we can actually do this. We think we can do this with the privacy preserving stuff.
Yeah, it's a really good question. From my end, I alluded to it a little bit at my talk, but when we're trying to study the pathogenesis of the disease, we're trying to understand like the molecular features of it. We need access to the patient tissue itself. And it's a little bit of a sort of a push-pull. I mean, it's difficult to get because it's, different types of tissue are just inherently difficult to get. It's also difficult to get because it's infected tissue. And so you have to have a lot of extra safety measures. And we actually, in some ways, we don't want more tissue because that means that fewer people are dying. So it's like as the infection has gotten under control and we see fewer cases, that's great. That's obviously what we want. But then it makes sort of understanding, doing the research on the tissue itself even harder because there's just fewer cases. So it's getting access to the stuff needed to generate the data is the hardest from our perspective.
So for our project, we're trying to look at the correlation between media coverage and the real numbers, right? So the assumption is that if people see something on the news media, and that might influence what the individuals do. But a variable in between the two is the media exposure, right? So it's really hard for us to know what kind of media sources the person is exposed to, on what platforms. So we have a lot of media data. We have the numbers of cases, but to me, it will be ideal if we know like where, how the people are exposed to what kind of media sources, and we can try to control different variables to see maybe media messages and what type of media messages in this type of media will have a stronger effect on this group of people than other groups of people.
Yeah, it's always the unmeasured variable that is the real challenge there. Let me throw a different question at you. One of the hallmarks I think that have been commented upon in this era of fighting COVID is the tremendous amount of cooperation and coordination that we've seen across disciplines, across geopolitical boundaries, across disciplinary boundaries. And the data sciences and computing have certainly been one of those groups that on the one hand have very much sort of been a support infrastructure. At the same time, we've seen entire sort of cohorts of computational and data scientists setting up volunteer organizations and whatnot. So it's been a tremendous period of sort of perceived barriers coming down. What sort, if any, sort of interactions that you might not have had before have you had? Can you comment, whether it's with different disciplines or with enlarging the sphere of groups you interact with, or whatnot? Could you tell a bit of a story about sort of what this has done in terms of broadening that for you?
So if I,
Go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead, yeah.
One obvious thing, one of the big barriers that we've faced when trying to put together our exposure notification system is identifying what is a contact. Under what conditions should we be worried about someone getting the disease from someone else? And it seemed like a very simple question, and the WHO had an answer and the CDC had an answer. But the problem was that there were different answers. And we chased down and tried to talk to all the experts. And after a while, it became clear that actually no one really knows, but everyone has a slightly different angle on where the solution space should be. And so that was very interesting and informative, I think, for us.
I want to add to that. I mean, so I think the first day, like in the first couple of months, I mean, March and April, there was this amazing feeling of everybody just, all the barriers are dropped and everybody's just collaborating, you know. So those days that, you know, so Ari and Mike and I, we had this initial days, the idea we were talking, you know, daily Zoom calls with people all over the world with having similar ideas and not similar ideas, people trying to do this, and like, and it was a really amazing concept. Everybody from everywhere just trying to just let it get it done, right? And it was amazing, and some of it has remained, but a lot of it has just gone back to normal business as usual. And there is something about you know, it always in times of stress, all the barriers go down, we go the best of ourselves, but somehow it dissipates, and it's not clear actually, you know, what to do in order to keep it going, you know, in some sense. But another thing, I think, and you know, then you talk to all these people from other disciplines, you try to understand, but you know, what people are doing, studying for years and decades. But I think there's one thing that we can do is that if we had a system like in place, you know, we don't know what's the next pandemic, what's the next challenge going to be, but we had a system in place that to start interdisciplinary research between different types, you know, areas in academia, and also between academia and business, academia and government, so that we know that next time it happens, it just ramps up much faster. It was really, really great, because a lot of the time and the work and the effort was just like to create those trusts, those relationships, and it takes ages. You know, if we had some you know, mechanism to say, okay, we will need to collaborate again sometime in the future, let's just keep it all the channels open, that would be great. It's not clear to me how to do it, but
absolutely. Yeah, there's groups, some of us have called for what we're calling rapid response networks.
right.
And there is gradually beginning to be a larger and larger conversation around the US around that. Ron, I know we have had you on one of the panels that we've organized for that. That's a really interesting discussion to see to what extent data science, which has kind of prided itself and I think justifiably so on its sort of free-spirited, innovative character. To what extent can it self-organize into a semi-standing organization that can network with the usual standing organizations around government and society and public health and whatnot, and be able to stand up when needed, but at the same time fade back into its usual everyday when otherwise not needed. Any other thoughts or comments on this?
So to us, it is the international scope of this project. So we started with countries where our members, team members, have some knowledge of. But then we presented this project in some other venues, and the Bio Today report about it. A lot of people from all over the world contacted us and want to collaborate with us. So for example, we have been working with people from Uganda, from Egypt, from Mexico, South Korea, Iran. So that's something that I didn't expect before. I think it's exciting because it's truly international project, but challenge is it also takes time, and it's challenging for me as a one of the project leaders to manage collaborators from all over the country, all over the world.
We have a comment that came in the chat here asking if you see a difference from topics. This looks like it's for Lei and Margrit. Do you see a difference from topics being covered by mainstream media sources and those from, say, newer social media?
So this is one thing on our plate that we plan to do. So far, we only focus on mainstream media, but we also want to look at like partisan media, like liberal-leaning conservative media, as well as newer media like social media. That's something that's on our list, but we haven't done that yet. We've collected Twitter data and also Weibo data from China.
If I may add, for the social media piece is particularly interesting because a number of the social media companies have come together and decided that they're going to supervise COVID-related research or data that is, and comments that are publicized on them. So I think you're going to have a very interesting difference.
Okay, so it looks like we're coming right up on the hour. I want to just thank all the people who joined us today, and I particularly want to thank the panelists for sharing their work. For those of you who would like to continue the conversation, we'd be delighted to do so. If you'd like to get involved in some way, go to the Hariri Institute website there, bu.edu/HIC, and click on Get Involved. If you'd like to follow us on Twitter or Facebook, all of the achievements that were talked about today have been things that we've already promoted on these channels, and that would allow you to continue to follow what we're doing here. And if you're really interested in the Institute and you've got a great idea for what the Institute could get involved with, whether you're at a company or in government or another academic agency, and you have something creative, send me an email. I'm always happy to talk. So thank you for joining us today.